Hello and welcome. You are listening to the Investor Lab, the auditory epicenter for passionate people seeking a life of freedom, choice, and abundance. And my name is Goose. And on today's show, we had a very special guest. His name is Nick Valois. Now, Nick is actually a Dashdot client, but what we talked about today was his journey, his story as an investor, as a human being, where he started, where he is now, the fact that he's well and truly in the upper echelons of successful property investors in Australia, and he's still got a long way to go. We talk about what his goals and dreams are with property and the lessons he's learned along the way. We even talked about a funny story about how some kangaroos broke in through the roof of one of his rental properties that we helped him buy in Townsville. So that is funny. So make sure you stick around for that. But if you want to hear a real story from a real person about how they have been able to build a successful, prolific, and profitable property portfolio in just 7 years, then this is the episode for you. It's really great to be able to hear the trials and tribulations that Nick has gone through and to be able to relate them back to your own journey and to be able to see what is possible. So I'm sure you're going to get a lot out of this. I really enjoyed this conversation. It was great. It was fun and it was dynamic. So I'm sure that you're going to enjoy it too. Now, without any further ado, let's get stuck into it. But if you like this episode, if you like more of this stuff, make sure you like, rate, review, share this from wherever you are to someone that you love and care about. We really appreciate you listening to the show and we love your feedback too. So if you've got any feedback, send us an email, hello@dashdot.com.au. Without any further ado, let's get stuck into it. And I'll see you on the inside. Hey guys, welcome back to the Investor Lab. Joining me today is a very successful investor. And I say very successful because he is one of the lucky few who've crossed into the top 1% of property investors nationwide. His name is Nick Valois. He's also been working with Dashdot, but he's got a lot of lessons along the way that we want to dig into about how he's gotten to this position, the lessons he's learned, the challenges he's had, and what that all looks like. Nick, welcome to the show.
Thanks, mate. Thank you very much for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure. It's a joy. Now, obviously, most people are probably not going to know anything about you or what you do. And I've kind of touched on it there. You know, you're in the top one. But have you ever reflected on the fact you're in the top 1% of property investors nationwide?
It's a statistic that's thrown around a lot. Most investors stop at 1, sometimes get to 2.
Yeah.
But then it drastically drops off when it gets over 3 or 4. But yeah, I've often thought about it and thought, well, I actually got there a little easier than I thought I would. If that makes sense. It's for time in the market sort of thing. And you get there. It's, but yeah, it's impressive, I guess.
Yeah, it is. And you're right. It's a very steep drop-off rate. It's about 90% don't get past 2. And then, then it's a really kind of steep drop-off from there. But look, before we start going straight into that, why don't we get to know you a little bit better? Because I'd love to kind of dig into your story. You've got a pretty interesting journey into kind of how you've progress through property, but also kind of generally through life. So why don't you give us a little bit of kind of a 60-second synopsis? Tell us a little bit about who you are, what do you do? You know, give us a bit of insight. Who are you?
Yep, 37 as of yesterday.
Happy birthday.
Thanks, mate. 37, married with a 3.5-year-old son and a 6-week-old baby girl. My wife is a primary school teacher. We live in Canberra. I am a carpenter by trade, who then I did uni at the same time I was doing my apprenticeship and did a Bachelor in Construction Management and ended up working residential carpentry and building for a while, got my builder's license, ended up in commercial construction as the site manager, where I spent a better part of a decade. And about 5 months ago, I moved over to client-side project management with one of the big 4 accounting firms, still managing construction projects, but large government projects. So
cool.
100 mil plus sort of stuff.
Okay, so you started out building. So you're 37 now. You're, as far as I can tell, and we're going to dig into this a little bit. You started investing when you're about 30. Roughly. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So you started investing. We're going to dig into that a little bit. Let's go back a little bit further. Like, where did you grow up? When did you get into construction? What's kind of been the journey? Like, let's start at the start. Where did you grow up?
When I grew up in Canberra, I spent some time living overseas. My father's a university lecturer, so we lived in Sweden for a number of years. which was pretty cool. At the end of school, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, so I just tried to get as good a grade as possible. I managed to get into law, which at the time, actually, it sounds impressive, but at the time it wasn't very impressive. They were really short of lawyers, so I think architecture and law were about the same. You only need like mid-70s or something like that. So
as long as you had a pulse, basically, you could be a lawyer.
Yeah, exactly. So I got into law, and I did like the first semester, and I hated it, mate. There was nothing more boring than reading Commonwealth law or law of torts, or I wasn't in the right frame of mind academically or in my personal life to go straight into such a heavy degree. Yeah. So I deferred, and I got a job working for LJ Hooker. Working as what they call buyer agents, but buyer agent back then, early 2000, I was the one who did all the open homes and took the offers, but I didn't do any of the listings. So I basically just dealt on the buyer's side as opposed to the listing side. And one of the I was selling this. It was like in Bungendore near Canberra. It was a block of like 4 little standalone townhouses. And this bloke turns up in his Ferrari, and he was walking around, and he was giving me a hard time, asking all the questions. And then he said, thank you, and was on his way out. And on his way out, I said, well, you're going to make an offer, or what do I have to do to get your business? And he said, oh, no, I was just saying who was selling my apartments. This is my block of land. I actually own all of the stuff around here. And he said, oh, you seem to know what you're talking about. He said, do you want to make some real money? And I sort of laughed, thinking, he was going to have you drug smuggling or something. And he said, well, you should do an apprenticeship. Don't waste your time paying back your university degree.
Really? So he was the one who said, get out of here and do a trade. Is that what he?
Yep.
That's really interesting. And so he was obviously driving around in a Ferrari, so fair enough. But so was he a builder, developer? Okay, so he basically said, if you want to follow my shoes, if you want to have some of the trappings of wealth or whatever, go and learn how to build, and then you too can have this kind of thing as well.
Well, he got out of his Ferrari in footy shorts and a pair of like redback steel cap boots.
Perfect.
Yeah,
perfect.
Man of my people. So I said, all right. Well, I said, I'd looked into it, but it was really hard to get an apprenticeship back then. It was super popular. It was a really hardly fought. For every position available, there was 20 or 30 applicants. It was a really difficult thing to get into.
A lot harder than getting into law, then.
Way harder. And he said, oh, that's fine. I've got a few contacts, sort of thing. And then one thing led to another, and I got an apprenticeship with the CITEA, Master Builders Association, which is just a group training organisation. They farm you out to whoever needs you or whoever's prepared to pay for an apprentice. And I got some pretty good experience doing that, working some commercial sites and mainly residential stuff the whole way through. And then when I finished, I was working for someone, and with carpentry, everyone, it's like anything, there's 10 ways to skin a cat. And I was working for a guy who thought the best way to do something was not the same way I did. And I thought, stuff this, I can do this as well. So, I got an ABN, and off I went, made a few mistakes along the way.
Is that just a kind of like a kind of a funny way to say that you were too pig-headed to be able to be employed by anybody else?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Story of my life.
Yeah. Fair enough.
I went out and did it for myself for a number of years. So 4 or 5 years I worked for myself. It was great fun. And then there was a period of time where making the leap into like commercial construction, no one would look at you unless you had the degree. It sort of became, the buzzword of, 2010. It was, unless you had the degree, you weren't considered even remotely capable of being able to do it. So I thought, well, I've already sort of, once you're enrolled, you're never unenrolled at uni. It's a business at the end of the day, and they keep your contact details in their database. So all I did was I changed my degree over to construction management. So I was really enjoying working as a carpenter, and I loved the industry. Yeah. And the degree I found relatively easy. I mean, I'd already been working in the industry a number of years, so it all came pretty naturally to me. And then though I had a bunch of frames who were meant to stand, and it got rained out, and I rang a mate of mine and said, oh, have you got any work for me at the moment? I've got a couple of guys that work for me where we can't stand these frames because the slabs were delayed with the rain. He said, yeah, come look, I'm doing this work on a commercial building site. We're installing windows. It's easy stuff. I can keep you going for a week or two. So we went and did that, and within a week or so, there was a certain industrial body that came in and said, oh, you're sham contracting, because I'm contracting to a contractor, even though I was a company. And so the builder said, well, yeah, we kind of still need you. Do you want a job? That's how I ended up as a foreman in commercial construction.
Yeah, right.
And then, yeah, the rest is history. I guess I worked my way up over nearly a decade. And
how do you find it? Because like from what I could hear, you enjoyed like getting on the tools, like you enjoyed the transition into carpentry and building and stuff. So is that a fair statement, or like
it was a big relief getting off the tools?
Because
your body does have a fair bit of wear and tear, and once you get off the tools, you think, oh, this is a really good break. You do definitely miss it. That's why when Vanessa and I bought our first house, we did a full renovation extension, and I did 99% of the work myself, which financially is a horrible decision.
Yeah, makes no sense.
Time value out the window. But I'm like, no, I'm going to save myself $1,500 on this, and I'm going to spend 8 weekends doing it myself. It was good. Also, nice to be living in a home that I can, say that I did myself, even if financially there's better ways of doing it.
It's not all about money, right? You want to have a sense of achievement and all of that kind of stuff too. So it doesn't always need to make financial sense. It can just make sense for life, which is good.
Yeah, definitely.
So so you've progressed up through construction management. You're now working for one of the big four, like pretty good career trajectory, I would say. So at what point did you get interested in property investing? Because I know a lot of people, particularly in trades, funnily enough, it's kind of like chefs don't cook at home, but a lot of tradespeople don't actually have any interest in investing or owning homes or whatever. They tend to spend a lot of their money. And a lot of people who have got a really strong career trajectory, because some of the reasons that people want to invest in real estate is so that they can create more time and more freedom and all of that kind of stuff. And sometimes that's actually not correlated with people who have a strong career identity or have a strong career progression, because they're just like, hey, I'm crushing it in my career, I'll deal with it later. So I'm interested to understand a little bit of that journey for you. Like, when did you start getting interested in property investing, and why?
For me, it was from a relatively young age. My best mate, his family had a coast house that they bought down the south coast for spare change in their pocket back in the 70s, and they were able to, with some other investment properties, they were able to afford a lifestyle where they had the house in Canberra, the family home, they had this house down the coast, but they never had to Airbnb it out or rent it out, or it was available for family and friends, and it was such a nice thing to have that you had. It was no flash place. It was an old asbestos shack, but walking distance from the beach, and it was a great place for friends to come together, for family to come together. And I thought I would love to have something like that when I'm older. So the more I looked into it, I thought, well, I can't just have something that's a financial burden. I can't just buy a house down the coast that that's nice to have, but no one wants the burden of that. So how do I then support being able to pay the mortgage and all of the rates and everything, but still have a place that I can go and take my family to and my friends to? And it's just a nice thing to, to grow up and have this extra space that that's available to you, that you can explore and do all those things. And then the more I got into it, the more I realized that, maybe buying a coast house is probably not the best of investment decisions. So then it went sharply the other way, which is currently the trajectory I'm on. And then the end goal is that one day I still would like to buy that place that, we're near the beach, and the family can enjoy, and my kids can enjoy and bring their friends too. And
yeah. So is that why you invest? Like, is that kind of like the North Star for you, is to be able to have those shared moments? Or
Yeah. I want to be able to share those things with my family and friends. And not that I came up from an underprivileged background by any means, but I definitely didn't come from money where, my family has all of this abundance to go overseas and everything else. I've always knew I had to work for it, and just working for it based off salary is pretty difficult. Like, even if you're earning a really good money, saving your pennies to go overseas or to buy a house or to buy a car, these things are really expensive and they take time, and I'm not a patient person. So I was looking for a way in which I could accelerate your success, basically.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. Isn't it? I really like that, Nick. I think it's for a lot of people, they're running away from something rather than running towards something. So they're sort of like, they're like, I want to get out of this situation, which is totally fine, and there's no judgment on either. But it's kind of nice. It sounds like you're running towards something, which is to create
Exactly. And the goal's super vague because everyone asks, it's like, oh, what's your end goal? It's like, well, I'd like to retire early. And like, well, how early? Oh, well, I don't know. How much money do you need to retire? Well, shit, I don't know. It depends on what my,
it's how many jets I want.
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, I and people say, oh, I don't want all the nice stuff. I mean, I don't want particularly nice things, but I'd love to own a Porsche one day. It's not a goal that's set in stone. I do know that I would like the freedom, which is, a pretty cliche thing to say, but it's so true. I'd like the freedom to be able to decide, well, I don't want to work in Canberra 5 days, 6 days a week. I'd like to work from my coast house 2 days a week, or, want the ability to mold the future as opposed to have it set in stone that I'm going to have to end up working till I'm 65. And
you might have to come and work for Dashdot, Nick. We've got a work from anywhere policy, so you could you can work down the beach.
I'm sitting in the spare room at a coast house in Bevis Bay at the moment on holidays. So
okay, we'll pick that up again later. So
send my resume.
Sounds good. So give us some optics on your portfolio then. Like, I'm mindful I don't want to get lost in the weeds for too long, but like, what is your tell us a little bit about your property journey? Like, where did it start? What was the first one? Sort of give us a little bit of the run through.
We bought our PPR in 2015 in Canberra, which is on the south side of Canberra. Great suburb, just separated by a small hill between what's called the inner south, and then property was 30-40% more expensive. So we figured it was a good place to buy. That's paid dividends over the last 6 or 7 years. We then purchased a property in Goulburn, which is about an hour's drive from Canberra. We were looking for an investment property. I wasn't really of the mindset of being too borderless at the time and couldn't afford to buy one in Canberra. So then we looked to the next spot out, Bungendore, couldn't afford Bungendore, and then the next town out from that is Goulburn. So that's basically...
was that basically the research process, was it?
That was the research process. Also, working in Canberra, you do come across a lot of people that live in Goulburn. Yeah. And, I work on a construction site, commercial construction, got a couple of hundred people on site every day. So you hear a lot about, because they're all builders, right? So everyone talks about houses because it's what they know. It's their currency is, dwellings. They are all talking about, Goulburn, the prices are going up, and, there's this new development going over here. And even from the end where I was working in the business, where we were tendering on the hospital that was going to be built down, so, circa $100 million project. And, do these things that are starting to come up, and you hear whispers? And I thought, oh, well, I've got the money sitting there. I don't want to buy in Canberra. It's got a 0 land tax threshold. So it would have been quite negatively geared. I want something that was fairly neutral. I knew I was going to get good growth out of it. Maybe not with a crystal ball, the best growth you could have gotten in the whole of Australia. But yeah, you've seen the numbers on it. I definitely didn't do bad because you were one of the reasons I decided to sell it. We had a chat about, where the next step was and what was holding me back, and it was some of the properties that were potentially could be doing well, better cash flow wise. Yeah.
So let's maybe dig into. Well, actually, no, we can kind of come back to that. So you bought your PPR in Canberra, right? Canberra. And then you bought property in Goulburn.
Then we bought in Goulburn.
Yeah.
Then we bought with a buyer agent in Morayfield in Queensland, and then we sold Goulburn.
Yeah.
No, sorry, we bought Townsville.
Yep.
With you, and then we sold Goulburn, and now we're going to buy again.
Perfect. Awesome. Okay, so that gets us up to it's Canberra, Goulburn, Morayfield, Townsville, and then you bought a commercial property.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, we bought a commercial property.
Yeah, you bought a commercial property, and then you've sold Goulburn. But that was six properties essentially, and yeah, because you're onto your sixth property now in the last 7 years, basically. Yep. And you've sold one, so you've kind of got 5 at the moment, right?
Yep.
Yeah. So it's interesting, right? Because let's maybe swing back, because I'm interested in some of the lessons you learned along the way. Like which ones have worked, which ones haven't worked, why? You mentioned there about selling Goulburn, right? Because basically you were starting to get stuck on finance. So yeah, let's dig into some of that.
So you read all the books that are out there, right? And there's a lot of books out there.
Yep.
And some of the early ones I read was, Robert Kiyosawa's, and I really like Peter Savage's book, The Top 20 Suburbs, just because it's got some more information and research-based stuff. But quite often the investment philosophy 5-10 years ago was you're either buying for cash flow or you're buying for growth.
Yeah.
And that's it. They're your two choices. And if you mix the two, you got rocks in your head. That was basically, you couldn't buy a book that was blended. It was one or the other. And what I quickly worked out, and Goldman's a perfect example of this, I was getting great growth out of Goldman, but there's only so much you can redraw on that growth because it just becomes more and more negatively geared. So Goldman was purchased for $420,000 or $410,000.
Yep.
But it was only renting for $380 a week. And I had I had 20% deposit less cost. So it ended up being, I had 15% or 18% deposit or something like that.
Yeah.
So it was costing me after tax at the end of the year about $1,500, $2,000. Sometimes it broke even depending on how much you had to spend on it during the year.
Yeah.
But then borrowing again, the bank only takes into account 70-80% of that. So instead of it only being $2,000 negative, it's actually $5,000 to $7,000 negative. And then you purchase the next
bank size. Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, I've got $30,000 worth of outgoings that aren't realised because it's just the assessment rate for the bank. So we were getting great capital growth out of it, but the time it would take for me to catch up by, not just rent gouging and kicking a tenant out to find someone more because it's not, they have a lot of protection as well as it's just not a nice way to do business.
Yeah.
It would have taken a long time for that property to sit on a balance sheet, a way in which the bank would look at it and say, they don't care that we sold it for $700,000. They care that it's only getting $380 a week in rent, but you've got a $300,000 mortgage on it.
Yeah. Yeah, got it. So what is your investment thesis now? And what do you think people need to know to make sure that they don't get stuck? Is it just as simple as make sure you got enough cash flow and growth, or
it really is in essence that simple, but there's a bit more to it. One, I did the first one myself. I already ingrained in me had more research than a lay person would do because I'm in the industry. I've lived locally for a long time, and builders talk a lot about property. So I had a lot of information about and some insider knowledge as far as large commercial infrastructure projects that were not necessarily public domain yet that were on the horizon. So I had a lot of the knowledge that most people wouldn't have. So I did make a fairly informed decision. For the next property, we went to a buyer agent, and I didn't have a particularly great experience, as you know, and I don't think I got the best property I could have gotten. It's definitely didn't go backwards or cost me, $100,000 and put me back 10 years, but there were better properties out there, which you definitely wouldn't know, Goose.
Yeah.
But, the biggest lesson I'd learned is that not all advice is equal. These other businesses, there are other businesses out there, like the one I dealt with, where they have a lot of experience, they have a lot of exposure in the market, they're doing all the right things, speaking on Sky News, all that sort of stuff, but it was very transactional. I think there were better options to be had, which is what led me to you guys, essentially. So I was looking for a more of a personal touch. And, just a different approach, different philosophy towards buying. I was sort of also at a point where no one could really help me or explain to me too well about why the bank wasn't super keen on why it was difficult, why do I keep having to change lenders. So, having that discussion with you and Nick and Gabby, and to work out that, we needed to add some cash flow to the situation and potentially look at getting rid of one or two properties that weren't yielding as good a cash flow as we needed to be able to project ourselves into that next stage.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, it's really interesting and some really great insights. So I'm interested though, for the average punter who's out there, how do you work out who to take advice from? Because it's a tough one, right?
It's tough. I mean, one thing that I think is important is that you don't take advice from someone who's only their first rodeo. Because they have there's no comparison at all. Whereas I knew a few people that were, it was their first experience with this buyer agent. They were like, oh, they were wonderful. They did this, 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 and this. But now, having dealt with property for a while and dealt with a few different people, that described experience is pretty crap compared to, what I got with you guys, for example. Yeah. And I'm not, it's not a paid advertisement. There's definitely chalk and cheese, and it did take me a while to recognise that. And there's also that, the time benefit. I could have done a lot of research myself because I know the industry, I know houses, I know real estate, I know quite a few different builders in different states that I could speak to. It still doesn't give you that amount of exposure to the market that, someone does full time. And I realized that. And then after speaking with you guys, it was pretty clear that I think we were going to be able to, work together and help me along the way.
Yeah, nice. And now we're buying our second property together, actually. We're in the process of. We're looking at
the first one was a banger.
Let's talk about that because it's a screamer, I reckon. If I remember correctly, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I reckon there was a bit of skepticism on your.
There was.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, you gave me a house that was riddled with termites. I'm the builder there going, I don't know about this. Yeah. No, but look, the deal was it was $230,000 house in Townsville.
Yep.
No tenant in it. It was vacant possession, pretty shitty condition. Needed a bit of work to it. But
it needed a lot more work to it after the Kangaroo broke in, though.
It did. A Kangaroo did break in, which no one, including the insurance company, believes. Scott from Hardcourts in Townsville, the legend he is, who managed the whole process, he was texting me photos of it because he rang me and he said, Nick, you're not going to believe me if I tell you this. But yeah, anyway, 2 wallabies ended up inside, breaking through the roof and locked in a bathroom, scaring the hell out of them.
You're the only person, full stop, that I know that has had a kangaroo or wallaby or whatever it was break in through the roof and then kick the shit out of the place and trash the joint.
Yeah.
Full stop, right? Let alone someone who's just bought an investment property and it's like in that kind of like handover period and we haven't even got a tenant. It's like madness.
Yeah. No, it was, look, in hindsight, it's funny. But Nick and I had some pretty good conversations about that during the actual goes and throws of it. But yeah, $230 for the house. The real estate agent selling the property had taken the photos in a way that it basically didn't show any of the termite damage. So when the building inspector went through it, they're like, there's some termite damage. So we did a deal with the owner. We're like, I want to cut some holes in strategic places. And I'm doing this from Canberra. So, Nick and I sat down. Nick Denshire works for Goose, for those of you who don't know who I'm talking about. Nick and I did a bit of a markup on the house plans. And we said, me as a builder saying, I want to cut a small viewing hole in each of these external walls in this location. And if there is severe termite damage and I don't go ahead with it, I will pay to patch those 4 or 5 holes. If we do go ahead with it, then I take ownership of the holes and, we move forward and I pay the tradesman who went there to cut the holes, sort of thing. So it costs like $1,500 to cut the holes and then to subsequently patch them and paint them and everything else. Termite damage was there, but not super bad. So we ended up deciding to, instead of going in with a 20% deposit, go 10% deposit and use 10% deposit to basically spend $25,000 and renovate the property. And the end result was excellent. The place looked great. Got a lick of paint, a bunch of fixed bits and pieces that weren't looking good. We had to fix the stairs, the deck, and a new deck and balustrading because it was a bit shoddy. Air conditioner and some lighting needed some work. But in the end, I got a place where I've got a mortgage of $170,000 on. It's renting for $410 a week.
Yeah. Definitely. Definitely that property was a lot more hands-on than usual. There was definitely a few more challenges with it. And one of the benefits was that you obviously have building experience, so you can understand the issues, which was pretty good. But that property is now, we ended up getting that property for like $205,000 right after the discount, right? So and that's now worth about $320 and yielding at about 8%.
So it was valued at $320. 8 weeks after I purchased it for $205. That was based on the small amount of cosmetic work, doing up all the yard because it's in Queensland, right, or Townsville. So you look the other way and it's overgrown. So chopping back all of that and putting up a new fence and all of that was only $25,000. It was nothing super crazy that we did to the property, but definitely worth it in the long run. But I was skeptical to begin with.
Totally. Yeah. No, fair enough. Just to be clear, I'm glad that it worked out as well. so that's nice.
Yeah.
I know, but
it rented out within an hour on the market for $20 more than it was advertised for.
That's awesome. Yeah. So you've ended up with about about $135K uplift, and an 8% yield. in next to no time. So that's pretty awesome. So I'm interested, largely because I know you came to us after having had a bad experience.
Yep.
And then there was some skepticism as we were going through the process, and fair enough, all good. So, but I'm interested now. Like now we're buying another property together, and it's great. You've kind of seen the other side of it, which is awesome. What kind of do you have any advice for anyone who? Because and I just kind of circling this back to like it's very hard to know who to trust, basically, right? And so, have you got any advice for someone who might be thinking about working with us or
definitely ask the questions. Nothing is set in stone. So, if a buyer agent's presenting you with a property and you think that property is not worth that, or you have some feedback on it, don't be afraid to speak up. Definitely, I would be spending some time up front saying to and it will go through this process where once we're ready to rock and roll, which we were ready to rock and roll just before Christmas, but then the Christmas period is sort of hampered getting stuff signed and witnessed to the bank and everything. So we'll be looking to kick off when I get back from holidays, early Feb. I would be sort of speaking with yourself and Gabby and Nick and saying, right, where more specifically will we be looking? Because, I'm not walking away and using that information to shock myself or anything like that. Because I understand the value in the research you guys have the capability of doing. But I would have a pretty good background on that area because I will go and do my own research. If you say we're looking in the north of Canberra, I will make it I will go and do a bit of research on the north of Canberra so that when you come to me and you say, because quite often the deals are quite time precious. They might be off market or pre-market, or there might be another interested party because the market is relatively hot everywhere. You don't have 2 weeks to make your mind up. You might have 12 to 24 hours or the deal will get taken off the table. So you need to be in a position where you're confident that it is also a good deal. Because with the last experience, I was completely confident that the deal was good. What I was skeptical about was potentially having a property vacant for 3 or 4 months while we did renovations. That was something that I didn't have control over, so it was an unknown. And Nick was pretty good at telling me that it'll be all good. It'll be all good. Trust me, mate. Yeah. Also, it's $180,000 mortgage. You can afford to float it for a little while because another thing my wife and I do is we won't buy a property unless we have 3 to 6 months worth of total costs in savings on top. And
is that it's a very interesting thing, the buffer amount. Like, is that per property?
Yeah, per property.
As your portfolio grows, you just have that parked for every property. You don't have one slush fund.
It's in an EFT, so it goes up and down a little bit. I know nothing about shares. I don't pretend to. I tried reading into it once. Way too complicated for a builder like me. So they're in super safe blue chip shares. But across the 5 or 6 properties, that's only $30,000-$40,000. So it's not actually a lot of money to sustain those properties for a long period of time. And that's how doomsday. If every property became vacant at exactly the same time, we could float it for 6 months without having to then come out of my own pocket.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because a lot of people think about buffer. I think about buffers slightly differently, but it's really interesting to get your perspective on that as well. So if you could, you've learned a few lessons along the way, right? You've had some wins. You've had some potentially, I wouldn't say misses, but you've had a few different scenarios going on. What if you could wind the clock 10 years back, right? What advice would you give to yourself?
Buy more property. It's time in the market, not time in the market. That took me a long time to realize because I come from a background where quite often people are building something to sell it or buying, renovating and flipping. The cost of entry and exit in Australia is so high that the margins are so skinny on that it's not. I mean, sure, sometimes it is worth it and people do make a career out of it. But for me, looking at it, it's not, a viable way of investing, basically. I wanted something that was a bit more set and forget. I couldn't get itchy feet and sell it on a whim or, So I heard that this company is going to do well, so I'll quickly pull my money out of one and put in the other. It's a bit more set and forget. It's bricks and mortar.
Yeah.
The Australian dream, owning a property. It's we're lucky enough to be born pretty much anywhere in Australia, knowing that at some point in your life you'll likely be able to afford a property in the city you live in. Whereas if you're born in New York City, or Hong Kong, or parts of mainland China, if you were born in those cities, unless you were born into serious wealth, you are never going to buy a property.
Yeah, totally. So, it's huge, right? And you kind of touched on it earlier around that kind of supercharging your ability to grow your wealth, because you can't I think about real estate. Yes, I agree with you, because I suck at shares because I have a tendency to be like a little bit, trigger happy and stuff. So I pretty much only do it just for a little bit of a muck around, basically.
Yeah, that's like the Bitcoin I own that's worth 80% less than what I paid for it.
Yeah. Exactly. But real estate's wildly different, right? I see that as, it's you're never going to be able to save faster than your property's going to be able to grow as long as you're buying relatively well. And so as a way to amplify your current position and move you faster to your future state, it's just such a viable asset class. It definitely is, and especially in Canberra's known for, it's got the highest rent in Australia. It's also, our median house price is $900,000, which will be a surprise to a lot of people listening to this. But Canberra is a very expensive place to buy property. The public service, I guess, props up the economy a fair bit. But the good thing about the public service is their incomes are usually capped at a certain level. Once you get to a certain band, then the amount of people over that band, it's, there's one per 1,000 as opposed to several hundred. So the public service cap on incomes sort of keeps everything at a reasonably comfortable level, but there's a lot of competition at that level. I think definitely there's some great properties in and around Canberra that have seen the benefit of the recent growth. We sure have at our house in Canberra. But yeah, it's Canberra's definitely one of those great places. It's a bit of a jewel. Yeah. And what advice, because what advice would you have to someone who hasn't yet started investing, right? So they might, because for a lot of people, that kind of barrier the barrier to entry can be hard. The hardest part is getting started, right? That's literally the hardest part. Once you start, then it becomes a bit of a flywheel. What would you say to someone who is just feels like they maybe can't get started or anything like that?
Get a good mortgage broker, because a good mortgage broker will definitely help a lot. I'm someone who, I got a calendar in my phone that's a reminder annually for every mortgage we have to ring the bank and give them a hard time and threaten to leave to get a better rate. Then the same reminder is 1 week later for me to ring Tim from Multipart, our broker, for him to do the same thing. So mortgage broker, worth their weight in gold. And the other thing is, don't be afraid of LMI. It's cost of doing business. Essentially, if you need to borrow an extra $50,000 to purchase your property, the time it would take you to save that $50,000, the property is going to outgrow it, even in a market that's not moving particularly quickly in Canberra, in Australia, sorry. And borderless. Yeah, if you live in the middle of Sydney and you're thinking, I want to buy at a place in Sydney, but I can't get into the market, that's because there's better options available elsewhere in Australia. There's a lot of more affordable regions. I would.
How did you get over that mental barrier for you? Because you mentioned earlier that you went into borderless investing and Goulburn was just down the road. How did you make that shift to go, this is okay? I guess,
like a lot of people, and I'd be interested to see what the statistic is on it, but I reckon most people that would invest in the city they live in. It'd be 80 or 90%. And it's a comfort thing. It's what you know. And, if you lived in an apartment in Sydney or Melbourne in 2012, you probably thought, oh, this is perfect. You probably bought another one of them as well, in which case you'd still be in some hurt. But I think it was just a comfort thing, knowing that it was locally. I knew, that sort of thing. But definitely living in a place like Canberra where I knew I couldn't afford to buy, it forced me to go borderless and then have to look elsewhere. And then as soon as I started reading books and watching shows and listening to podcasts and hearing about the different options. And at the time when I first started investing, every man and their dog was buying investment properties in Logan, and I resisted the urge to jump in there.
How do you feel about that now?
Still pretty good, I think. I think I wouldn't have gotten the world's greatest property, but it would have done pretty well, I think, or would have done okay. But I also learn by listening and reading here a lot more about the demographics and how economy in different states works, which I found quite fascinating, because Canberra is really safe and secure. That's why a lot of people invest in Canberra, because you don't necessarily get a good yield, but you get good, strong rental income if you've got a solid amount of money to throw at it. Very low vacancy rate always. Canberra's always below like 1%.
Yep.
And good growth. You just need a lot of cash to get in at a point where you can then, keep going.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So that's we've covered a lot of ground here. Is there anything else that you wanted to dig into? Because
no, not really. I think, the biggest takeaways from investing is that, one, it's possible to do for anyone, really.
Yeah.
Two is that money makes money. So when we bought our PPR in 2015 to when we bought Goulburn in 2018, that was me saving money to buy Goulburn. Since then, I've put precious little of my own savings into property, because I was able to redraw and use that equity to purchase again. And then, to keep on doing it that way, you end up with a pretty complex list of financial sort of hierarchy as far as mortgages and bits go. But it allowed me to, project a way through. So numbers over 7 years was, so we've got nearly $3 million worth of property with a $1.4 million mortgage. So
nice.
In 7 years, I added $200,000 a year to my income, essentially.
That's amazing.
Look at it like that, which, and when I first started investing too, I was listening to all these podcasts, and every person that came on, they're like, I own 25 properties. And you think, how the fuck did they do that? And then so I started off and I bought 3 units in Sydney in 2005. And then by 2009, I'd made $900,000 in equity. And you think, okay, well, it's pretty easy.
Also, lending policies were very different, right?
Yes,
so that's actually the biggest one, right? So all of the people that are like, I've got 30, 40, 25, whatever properties, lending policies were wildly different than they are now. You and I are a fairly similar age. I'm a couple of years younger than you, thank you. And but we're a fairly similar age. And I had the same kind of thing. I was like, hang on a sec, what about all these people that have bought like 30 properties and stuff? But, basically since the Royal Commission, it's like it's all kind of changed. You can't necessarily just refinance as much. But to your point, though, that growth that just happens in the background, and the beauty about property is it just happens, you don't even pay attention to it, and it's happening. So
yeah, I mean, look, there's been great growth in the last 6 months. There's no denying that. But for the last 6.5 years of those 7, nearly 8 years, there wasn't like 10% month on month on month. It was just slowly as she goes. Each state has its own, basically, we know roughly what that's going to do as an average over a 10-year period. It's good, solid rental returns, low vacancies, all the sorts of stuff that you guys look into for me, because I don't have the time to do it. Yeah. Oh, here's a good one for you. As here's a real reason where I worked out why not to try and do it myself continually, which is just a force of habit.
Yep.
So Nick and I were chatting about the place in Townsville.
Yeah.
And then one day when he rang me, I got off the phone and I was actually having a beer with a couple of my mates. And they're like, oh, where are you buying? I said, oh, here's the address, have a look at it, sort of thing. They're having a look. And then, my best mate says to me, he's like, oh, check out this place. It's, about the same value and whatever. And I said, because he was in the market to buy an investment property. Yeah. And I said, well, don't just go and buy something sight unseen, because it happens to be, 2 kilometres away from what I was looking at buying.
Yeah.
So next time I was on the phone, I said to Nick, hey, mate, there's another property that's nearby. Have you had a look at this one? And I mentioned the address. And within 2 seconds, he said, oh, that's underneath the flight path for the proposed airport. That's awesome. That's what you're paying for. Yeah. That's what you pay for. Essentially, that's literally it in a nutshell. I didn't know that. I would have taken me a long time to work that out. And so that's basically the level of research that I don't have time to do, that I put my faith in you guys to do it. And I know you do it. So,
yeah. And it's also, just to add on to that, it's also about leverage, right? Because a lot of people, what they want to do is they want to achieve freedom. You mentioned that earlier. And freedom is time. Like really at its core, it's time to do what you want, when you want, with who you want. And so you just got to be careful that you don't compromise on that objective, by trying to do everything yourself. Like a lot of people that are like, only buy properties close to them so they can manage all the properties and stuff. It's like, do you have a desire to be a professional property manager? I thought you wanted like more time. What's going on?
Worst job on earth.
Yeah, totally. Well, mate, I want to kind of dig into our final question. I've actually really enjoyed this episode, so thanks. It's been very insightful.
No worries, mate.
I want to kind of dig into our last question now, and I want you to imagine you've achieved a lot already, and I'm sure you're going to achieve a lot more because you've just the way you're thinking about property and the way you're thinking about your goals and everything like that. But imagine it's your last day on earth, a long time from now, decades and decades into the future. You've accomplished everything that you wanted. You got the house on the coast. You've been able to share all of that kind of stuff. But for whatever reason, the moment that you die, everything that you've ever created or achieved is going to be wiped from the face of the earth. But you get to leave behind 3 simple truths that are going to live on forever. 3 lessons that you want to leave with the world. What are your 3 truths?
So I was thinking about this leading in, and I reckon I got 1 controversial and 2 pretty sage pieces of advice.
Oh, great. I love controversial runs. Let's go for it. 1
is I would spend a lot more time ensuring that religion doesn't exist moving forward. And definitely, I would be purchasing more property so I had more freedom earlier on. So I had more of that time to do what I want, when I wanted, more time with the kids, more time for everything, more time to get up in the morning and have breakfast and move forward, and then, rush out the door and, time basically is what you're buying.
Yep.
And the third one's escaped me.
Okay, so you got no religion, you got more property. Cool. That's pretty solid. So,
well, the property is just time. I'm buying myself more time in that life, basically. Yeah. I'm sure if you spoke to an investment banker, or investment broker, they would say buy more shares because that's what they know and they know how to do that. But I just don't like the risk of the leverage incapabilities of it.
Yeah, fair enough.
And thirdly, I don't know, mate.
That's okay. Okay. I think you've got two pretty strong ones. I'll
happily dedicate myself to those 2 courses.
Okay, sounds good. Nick, it's been awesome. Thanks so much. It's been really nice to have you on the show. I'm excited to see what the next property we get with you is going to be. Pass on my regards to Vanessa and the kids. All the best.
Will do. Thanks, mate. Appreciate the chat.